restoring men in history, an exciting one today. If you can stick with it, it may be a little long because I'm not going to break up in the middle and make comments. We're going to read it in continuity for Dave Harrington and others. And we did this in continuity for the groups, and Dave Harrington thought we should do it in continuity for you all. So we will, April 30th, 1789. You had the first inaugural address ever, George Washington. Probably the greatest president ever, I think so, anyway. And he gave this inaugural address, and if you will stick with it and have the patience to listen to the language and the beautiful words in this inaugural address. He delivered it to the Senate and the House, 1789, April 30th. And there's another one we want to do, but we want to do some of these read all the way through. And we'll try to put enough energy in it that you won't get bored. But if you can stick with the language and the words and hear the difference in today's speeches, and then I think it will mean much to you gentlemen. And it's something every American should know. The speeches of George Washington, father of our country. So this is just fantastic. And I think it's important to hear these all the way through. And when you hear these kinds of speeches, it increases you in a man. It increases your vocabulary, your language, everything in you. And what are we here to do at Restoring Men in History? Make men better, stronger, and men of virtue. It's in here, virtue. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Now, we could go into a lot about Washington, but I want to get to the speech because with the comments, even if we leave some of the comments out, which we will have to do, the comment section will make it long if we go back through it and break it down. So maybe we can give a little more energy for Dave Harrington out there today. It is a speech. It could be read as a speech. Sometimes we just do the readings. Fellow citizens of the Senate and House of Representatives. Among the vicissitudes incident to life, no event could have filled me with greater anxieties than that of which the notification was transmitted by your order and received on the 14th day of the present month. On the one hand, I was summoned by my country, whose voice I can never hear but with veneration and love, from a retreat which I had chosen with the fondest predilection, and in my flattering hopes with an immutable decision, as the asylum of my declining years, a retreat which was rendered every day more necessary, as well as more dear to me, by the addition of habit to inclination, and of frequent interruptions in my health, to the gradual waste committed on it by time. On the other hand, the magnitude and difficulty of the trust to which the voice of my country called me, being sufficient to awaken in the wisest and most experienced of her citizens a distrustful scrutiny into his qualifications, could not but overwhelm with despondence one who, inheriting inferior endowments from nature and unpracticed in the duties of civil administration, ought to be peculiarly conscious of his own deficiencies. In this conflict of emotions, all I dare aver is that it has been my faithful study to collect my duty from a just appreciation of every circumstance by which it might be affected. All I dare hope is that if, in executing this task, I have been too much swayed by a grateful remembrance of former instances or by an affectionate sensibility to this transcendent proof of the confidence of my fellow citizens, and have hence too little consulted my incapacity, as well as disinclination for the weighty and untried cares before me. My error will be palliated by the motives which mislead me, and its consequences be judged by my country with some share of the partiality in which they originated. Such being the impressions under which I have, in obedience to the public summons, repaired to the present station, it would be peculiarly improper to omit in the first official act my fervent supplications to that almighty being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect. that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the United States. A government instituted by themselves for these essential purposes, and may enable every instrument employed in its administration to execute with success the functions allotted to his charge. And tendering this homage to the great author of every public and private good, I assure myself that it expresses your sentiments not less than my own, nor those of my fellow citizens at large less than either. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. And in the important revolution just accomplished in the system of their united government, the tranquil deliberations and voluntary consent of so many distinct communities from which the event has resulted cannot be compared with the means by which most governments have been established without some return of pious gratitude, along with a humble anticipation of the future blessings which the past seemed to presage. These reflections, rising out of the present crisis, have forced themselves too strongly on my mind to be suppressed. You will join with me, I trust, in thinking that there are none under the influence of which the proceedings of a new and free government can more auspiciously commence. By the article establishing the executive department, it is made the duty of the presidency of the president to recommend to your consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. The circumstances under which I now meet you will acquit me from entering into the subject further than to refer to the great constitutional charter under which you were assembled, and which, in defining your powers, designates the object to which your attention is to be given. It will be more consistent with those circumstances and far more congenial with the feelings which actuate me to substitute, in place of a recommendation of particular measures, the tribute that is due to the talents, the rectitude, and the patriotism which adorn the characters selected to devise and adopt them. In these honorable qualifications, I behold the surest pledges that is on one side no local prejudices or attachments, no separate views, nor party animosities will misdirect the comprehensive and equal eye which ought to watch over this great assemblage of communities and interests, so on another, that the foundation of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality, and the preeminence of free government be exemplified by all the attributes which can win the affections of its citizens and command respect of the world. I dwell on this prospect with every satisfaction which an ardent love for my country can inspire, since there is no truth more thoroughly established than that there exists in the economy and course of nature an indissoluble union between virtue and happiness, between duty and advantage, between the genuine maxims of an honest and magnanimous policy and the solid rewards of public prosperity and felicity, since we ought to be no less persuaded that the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained, And since the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered, perhaps, as deeply as finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. Besides the ordinary objects submitted to your care, it will remain with your judgment to decide how far an exercise of the occasional power delegated by the 5th article of the Constitution is rendered expedient at the present juncture by the nature of objections which have been urged against the system, or by the degree of inquietude which has given birth to them. Instead of undertaking particular recommendations on the subject in which I could be guided by no lights derived from official opportunities, I shall again give way to my entire confidence in your discernment of the public good. For I assure myself that whilst you carefully avoid every alteration which might endanger the benefits of a united and effective government, or which ought to await the future lessons of experience, a reverence for the characteristic rights of free men, and a regard for the public harmony, which will sufficiently influence your deliberations on the question how far the former can be impregnably fortified or the latter be safely and advantageously promoted. To the preceding observations, I have one to add, which will be most properly addressed to the House of Representatives. Concerns myself, and will therefore be as brief as possible. When I was first honored with a call into the service of my country, then on the eve of an arduous struggle for its liberties, the light which I contemplated my duty required that I should renounce every pecuniary compensation. From the resolution I have in no instance departed, and being still under the impressions which produced it, I must decline, as inapplicable to myself, any share in the personal emoluments which may be indispensably included in a permanent provision for the executive department, and must accordingly pray that the pecuniary estimates for the station in which I am placed may, during my continuance in it, be limited to such actual expenditures as the public good may be thought to require. Having thus imparted to you my sentiments as they have been awakened by the occasion which brings us together, I shall take my present leave, but not without resorting once more to that benign parent of the human race, in humble supplication that, since he has been pleased to favor the American people with opportunities for deliberating in perfect tranquility and dispositions for deciding with unapparelled unanimity on a form of government for their security, of their union, and the advancement of their happiness, so his divine blessing may be equally conspicuous in the enlarged views, the temperate consultations, and the wise measures on which the success of this government must depend. So that is a magnificent speech, ladies and gentlemen. Every man should hear that. Every lady should hear that. Here's the thing. Let's just go back and read some of it. And as we go, I'll make a few comments. We could stay in it all day, so we'll try not to be here all day. But he starts out and he says, no event could have filled me with greater anxieties. What does that mean? This man has accomplished incredible feats through his life. He's fought in the French and Indian War, led the army, won the war with the greatest empire in the world, the British Empire, and yet he's had administrative duties. He ran the whole army with little money and little resources, put his own money into it, his own energy, his own effort. And yet this causes him anxiety. Why do you think that is? It causes him anxiety because he really loves this country and he's a humble person. He has magnificent humility, George Washington. He is such an outstanding hero for men today. And there's a lot of false arrogance in society. George Washington really accomplished a lot and had such humility. He's a hero of mine. I love this man. Let's go on. He goes on to say this. On the one hand, I was summoned by my country. See, he was summoned. He didn't seek it out. He didn't seek power. He was summoned. In fact, we could go behind the stories here. Hamilton wanted him to run. Jefferson wanted him to run. And in fact, thought he was the only man that could bring the states together. and have it last. And they wanted it to last. They thought about the future, posterity. See, these men thought differently. They weren't thinking of just simple economic rewards for themselves. They were statesmen trying to create a country that would last. But let's go on, because we could stay here forever, ladies and gentlemen. Whose voice I can never hear but with veneration and love. This man loved his country. From a retreat which I had chosen with the fondest predilection. So he had chosen, he wanted to just be on his farm. At the end, he does again. On the other hand, the magnitude and difficulty of the trust which the voice of my country called me. So again, called him. Being sufficient to awaken the most experienced, a distrustful scrutiny into his qualifications. So think about that humility. Again, humility. How many times will we see, when you heard this speech, did you hear humility out of this great man, this outstanding man? Do we scrutinize politicians on whether they will follow the Constitution? No. We don't ask enough, is it constitutional or not, of politicians. We debate policies that aren't constitutional, but let's stay on this. Could not but overwhelm with despondence one who, inheriting inferior endowments, this is Washington again, with great humility. I mean, this is amazing, ladies and gentlemen. This is amazing. This man has such humility, and he's accomplished so much. You can just go over and over and over. In this conflict of emotion, all day of years, that has been my faithful duty to collect my duty. My faithful study to collect my duty from a just appreciation of every circumstance. So he believes it's a duty, and they thought that way back then. If you remember the Declaration, it is right, it is your duty. We have a duty today to carry on this republic, gentlemen. You men have a duty to carry on this republic, to think about this republic, to contemplate it. Not bred in circuses, this country, the Constitution. All I dare hope that if, in executing this task, I had been too much swayed by a grateful remembrance of the former instances, or by an affectionate sensibility to the transcendent proof of the confidence of my fellow citizens, humility again, as well as the disinclination for the weighty and untried cases before me. He's contemplative and serious, right? He knows he's the first president. Nothing has been tried before. He's going to have to think through, whatever he does, he can move the country to tyranny or not, the man who could be king. So this is fantastic, weighty and untried cares before me. He's going to have to establish the precedents for this country. And he did a phenomenal job. He's not arrogant. He could have been. He could have said, I in the speech, by the way. My error will be palliated by the motives which mislead me, and its consequences judged by my country. Another moment of humility. Look at the humility in this speech. This is why we're going back through it. And again, he knows consequences, right? He's going to be judged, and he's concerned about that, about reputation. How much are these guys concerned about it? Doesn't seem much, right? They seem like they believe they are above you. And he's worried about the future of the country, thinking ahead. Such being the impressions under which I have, in obedience to the public servant summons of obedience, duty. He has that obedience, duty. Repaired to the present station, it would be improper to omit in the first official act, and my fervent supplications to that almighty being. Here we're going to break separation of church and state right here again. He's given this to the House and the Senate. My fervent supplications to that almighty being. This is in official duties as the president. No line. There's no line, separation of church state. That was a court case, we'll go over it, where a judge pulled that, using a letter from Thomas Jefferson. We'll get into that later. Let's stick with this. It's long enough. My fervent supplications to that almighty being who rules over the universe. Who's he give credit to? Who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect. Now, right? You want to fix something? What's he saying here? Not only does God guide the nation, it guides men and can fix every one of your defects. God can, you can't, right? Who rules? God. He could have said, I. Who helps defects in us? God. Benediction. They consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States. Notice how they use these words, liberties. How often do we hear it today? We didn't hear it years ago. We hear it a little bit today more. Liberties and happiness. Pursuit of happiness was in Declaration of Independence. Listen, we need to talk more about liberties and the purpose of government. What is the purpose of government? That's another video. And happiness, we'd go in Aristotle, but let's keep going because I think this is going to get long. But anyway, happiness, Aristotle over a lifetime, right? And friends and the virtues, right? Gives you happiness. Combining them. A government instituted by themselves for these essential purposes. Government instituted for what? Essential purposes. Created by whom? You, the people, the states. The states ratified it, right? We, the people. Patrick Henry. And then the states ratified one by one, right? Virginia and the others. States came first, right? Not the federal government. Federal government got its power from states. Limited few powers. And may enable every instrument employed in its administration to execute with success the functions allotted to his charge. So there you go. May enable every instrument employed in its administration to execute the success with the functions allotted to his charge. Notice he doesn't want more power. He doesn't say, give me more. Hey, we need to fix this. I want more power. He doesn't say that, right? He says with the functions, and he's content with that. He wants to protect that. He could have increased them. He was George Washington, very popular. He didn't. He wanted to stay within his constitutional sphere. Great man. In tendering this homage, here he goes again. Who's he going to give the credit to, himself or God? Homage to the great author of every public and private good. Now let's look at that. In tendering this homage to the great author of every public and every private good. Could have said, hey man, I won that war, beat the British. Whew, my battles were great. My victories were great. Remember when I crossed Delaware, man, I'm fantastic. I am exciting and dynamic and I am great. But he doesn't. Gives all the credit to God. See that? Separation church state never in there. Never written in the Constitution. Made up by a judge. And bought into. But anyway, let's stay on this. Could have said, aye. Says God, God, God. I assure myself that it expresses your sentiments not less than my own. Again, who's he focused on? You, the people. His opinion's not better than yours. He wants your guidance. Nor those of my fellow citizens at large less than either. He respects the citizens. He's a servant leader. Notice the difference in him and today many, many politicians. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore, use that word adore, the invisible hand. Here he goes again to God. Here's another one. See that? No separation of church state. Christian principles founded this nation. Here you go. Christian principles founded this nation. It's right here in this document. First inauguration. And adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Be grateful, have gratitude, because God has blessed the United States of America. He understood it, see, he was there, he lived it. He should have been killed and shot many times. He wasn't. So providence was not just on the United States of America, it was on him and using him to secure this republic. So God's hand was on the United States and George Washington both. And he's giving all the credit to God here. He could have said, I won that war. I won this battle. I did this. I kept the troops going. There was no troops. There was no money. We had no money. We had no money. We had to march in the snow. There were bloody feet in the snow. Look what we did. Beat the Hessians, professional army, right? He didn't say that. He lived it. He experienced. He gives all the credit to God, not himself. How many men would do that today in Washington that are serving currently? How many men today even recognize it? Or recognize that this nation was based on Christian principles? How many even can say that? So we have much to be grateful for. He has blessed us going on. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of, here it comes again. What? What's he going to say? Providential agency, giving credit again to God. Nothing about this speech. There's no I's, there's no me, there's no George Washington. It's all about God. Very clear who he credits. Not himself, God. Why is the United States success? Divine providence. He has the hand on this nation. He has his hand on Washington. And in this important revolution just accomplished in the system of their united government, the tranquil deliberations. Do we have that today? Tranquil deliberations. Marxism must divide. Shut down the argument. What about the censorship of the federal government right now? Censorship. Shutting down discussion instead of having good, quiet deliberations. And voluntary consent of so many distinct communities from which the event has resulted cannot be compared with the means by which most governments have been established without what? Some return to gratitude, pious gratitude. He has so much gratitude for what's happened and what's occurred, and he saw it, he lived it. And there he said voluntary consent. Notice that word. Voluntary consent. It's not a king, it's not a dictatorship. They didn't want tyranny. Voluntary consent. But established without some return of pious gratitude. Voluntary, not a king, not a dictator. Gratitude is so important to us men. I think I just said that. Along with a humble anticipation of the future blessings to which the past seems to presage. Okay, I think we talked about that. Having gratitude is so important from that. You will join with me. You will join with me, right? It's not him. I'm not going to do this by myself. He includes the people and the House and the Senate. He's not going to be a dictator or a king. He includes the House and the Senate. Free government. Free government. We chose it. By establishing the executive department has made the duty of the president to recommend the administrative judge necessary and expedient. So we'll look at that, necessary and expedient. So he's only going to recommend, notice that language, recommend if it's necessary and expedient. Right? Very important. Now look what they're trying to do, and look where the federal government has gone, and look where they've gotten involved unconstitutionally in all these spheres that they weren't delegated the powers for. We don't need to go into those. We've done that before. But one example is healthcare. Federal government has no power for healthcare. Get it? So this language is great. So it needs to be necessary. The circumstances under which I now meet you will equip me from entering and to refer to that great constitutional charter. Notice his respect and how he honors the Constitution. Don't we wish we had men in Congress today that were saying, hey, we don't need to debate this, it's unconstitutional. We don't need to debate it, it's unconstitutional. In fact, we need to be rolling back, ending these departments that are unconstitutional. The Department of Education, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to go through them all because I've done it in other videos. But EPA, these unconstitutional agencies need to be unwound, and they're way too powerful. Administrative state. So would it be great if Congress was debating, we must get rid of this department? Defund it. Give it no money. That's something to defund, right? Let's keep going. So again, he's making recommendations. He's not a dictator. He's not a king. He doesn't want to be that. Doesn't want power. Washington never wanted power. He just wants to make some recommendations if they're in his constitutional sphere. Isn't that fantastic? Fantastic. And in which defining your powers designates the object to which your attention is to be given. So they've got defined powers. When the states ratified the Constitution, they gave the federal government a little bit of power. They have taken much more and done things unconstitutionally. But he wants to stay within the sphere, his constitutional sphere, and the limited defined powers. Federal government's powers are very defined and few, limited. Restore the Constitution, and it will take care of so many of our problems. If we teach virtue in the home, it will be more consistent with those circumstances and far more congenial with the feelings which actuate me to substitute in place of a recommendation of particular measures. Attribute this to the talents, okay, the patriotism, I don't think we need this, so we'll keep going. He does talk about that as on one side, no local prejudices or attachments, no separate views, nor party animosities. Now, one way to avoid that is if the federal government isn't this enormous beast taking powers from the states, people can get along with federalism in the states. You can have Texas doing Texas, California doing California, and take care of using federalism. When the federal government gets involved in so many things and there are these parties, you have these party animosities striving for power because the federal government has so much. So we could have a much better union if we restored the Constitution and limited the power of the federal government that was ratified, the way it was ratified, limited, few, defined powers. So Washington doesn't like the parties. We'll get into that in another address that I'd like to do. We'll misdirect the comprehensive equal eye, which ought to be watch over this great assemblage of communities and interests. This is a key point, that the foundation of our national policy will be laid in what? What did he say? We will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality. Now, how far away are we from that? Foundation of our national policy will be laid in pure and immutable principles of private morality. And they talked a lot in those days about virtue and morality, virtue and morality. In fact, the founders, many of the founders and many of the ratifiers said, Constitution won't matter if you don't have morality. The Republic can't stand without morality. John Adams, Patrick Henry, and others. George Washington included in his farewell address. So, you need virtues and morals for the country to last and for the Constitution to stand. That is the foundations. Lessons that would come out of the home, right? Men teaching virtue in the home to their boys, to their girls. That comes from the home. And then from the home, you can possibly serve, not command, serve in Washington now and be a servant leader to the people and to the Constitution, taking an oath to uphold it. But those virtues and values will come out of the home. So you get virtues and values in the home, and then you can go to Washington and serve, right? And we need to end the unconstitutional Department of what? Education, of course, because now it's Marxist indoctrination, so that won't work well. Homeschool if you can. Exemplified by all the attributes which can win the affections of its citizens. Let's talk about this. How many reps today want to win the affections of its citizens? They hate MAGA, don't they? Right? They hated the Tea Party, the Republican establishment. The Uniparty doesn't like any threat to their power, so when they start attacking something, it might mean just it's a threat to their power, right? So you saw just in Ukraine, some Republicans were opposed to that, and certain senators were saying they shouldn't even, were irritated by that someone would disagree with them on giving funding to Ukraine. The people and the other senators they were upset with. So very different than this, which can win the affections of its citizens and command respect of the world. It's just an amazing statement, win the affections of its citizens, right? One of my favorite lines in the speech, there's many. Let's go on. Because today, many politicians seem like they seem to me like they feel like they're above me, right? They seems like they're not about serving, but dominating, right? I dwell on this prospect with every satisfaction, which an ardent love, again, love for his country as a parent, can inspire, since there is no truth more thoroughly established than there exists in the economy and course of an indissoluble union between what? What's so important, he says? Virtue and happiness. And if you go back to Aristotle, right, where do you get happiness from? Well, it's a combination of friendship and the virtues, right? And you look at it over a lifetime. Virtue and happiness, words so often mentioned in the past. Another one of my favorite lines. There's so much in this speech, we could stay here all day. What would the Republic look like if we just taught virtue in the home? We just talked about that. Between duty and advantage, there's a duty. Washington knew he had a duty. Followed it. And we have a duty to restore the Republic, restore the Constitution, and restore men. All of us have a duty to restore the Constitution and restore the Republic. The genuine maxims of an honest and magnanimous policy and the solid rewards of public prosperity and felicity. Again, you don't hear these words often. Since we ought to be no less persuaded that the propitious smiles of heaven, again, he gives it up to God. God's all the way through here, can never be infected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order. I think we talked about that. Did we? Disregards the eternal rules of orders and right which heaven itself has ordained. Again, not about himself, about God. Think if a nation follows the eternal rules of orders, where would they be? They'd probably be blessed by God, right? Since the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered, perhaps as deeply and finally staked on the experiment entrusted to, and I love this line, this is a fantastic line, entrusted to the hands of whom? Of you, the American people. This experiment is entrusted to us. We the people. You, me, us. We the people. We have to protect the republic. It is our duty and up to us. If we love this country like Washington, we have to put our time, money, and energy into this country. This magnificent republic will only last as the people go. Is there virtue being taught in the home? Are we following the Constitution? Besides the ordinary objects committed to care, will remain with the judge to decide how far an exercise of the occasional power delegated by the fifth article of the Constitution is rendered expedient at the present juncture by the nature of objections. What's he talking about there when he says fifth article? Article 5, how do you change the Constitution? How do we do it? How do you change the Constitution? Not with a judge, not with Congress, not with the presidency, not executive orders, not a law, not a judge for sure, not the Supreme Court. You change it with an amendment, you go through the amendment process. That's Article 5. And he tells us to be careful with that, right? But he tells you there's a way to do it. Instead of undertaking particular recommendation on the subject, which I could be guided by no lights derived from Mr. I shall again give way to my entire confidence in your discernment and pursuit of the public good. For I assure myself that whilst you carefully avoid every alteration which might endanger the benefits of a united and effective government, to await the future lessons of experience. So be careful, get experience, listen to experience, await them, right? Experience. Past history, it means a lot. Look how the Marxists try to destroy history and experience. We can learn much from experience. Washington had a lot of experience. So before you do a change, be careful. You might damage the Republican Constitution doing that, right? And I'll give you some examples. 16th and 17th Amendment really damaged the Republic and the power of the states. All right? A reverence for the characteristic rights of free men. How many politicians serving in Washington have this? Or even in the State House? How many? You tell me. How many politicians do you think have a reverence for the characteristic rights of free men? They're spending galore and crazy. They don't want to protect your border, but the Ukrainian border. Not really a respect for you, for us, for me, for everybody, for American citizens. And a regard for the public harmony. Now, that's one of my favorite lines, too. There's so many lines I love here. Think about today and how different it is. Washington wanted a public harmony. He didn't want parties. He wanted to stay in his constitutional sphere. You see how different he is than today's politicians. Didn't want more power, walked away. We can get into that later. That's not for here. But different, public harmony versus Marxists driving us apart for what? Power. Dividing rich and poor, dividing black and white, dividing each generation, dividing old and young. And it's a trap, right? Because if you're on the free side, you believe in freedom, you can be young, old, black, white, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Freedom side, constitutional side. Doesn't matter about age, doesn't matter about color. But if you want to divide people, you've got to turn them against each other. Think of how many politicians and how the media does that today. You know it. All right. Now watch this. He's in the service of his country. He doesn't even take a salary again. He didn't during the war either. That's an amazing man. Think of the politicians today that are doing stock trades, coming out. They go in. He was one of the wealthiest men, probably the wealthiest man in Virginia and one of the richest men in the United States at that time of the colonies. I believe he was, if not the richest, he was the richest person in Virginia. All right. And yet he sacrificed, spent money, spent time, spent energy on the war. and he gave up his salary as the general. Who would do that today? He gave up his salary as the president, too. And lastly, once more, to the benign parent of the human race, and humble supplication that since he has been pleased to favor the American people with opportunities for deliberating in perfect tranquility, think about that, and the advancement of their happiness. So his divine blessing may be equally conspicuous in the enlarged views, the temperate consultations, and the wise measures on which the success of this government must depend. So you want this government to be successful? You want the United States to be successful? Here he says it. You need the divine blessing. And you better supplicate to get that. We must protect the Constitution and this republic peacefully. Here is to George Washington, to you men watching, to the ladies watching, and to virtue and to happiness and to the republic. Thank you.